Rogers TV Ottawa. The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Dobrý deň, drahí diváci. Prinášame vám januárové číslo televízneho programu Slovak Spektrum. Pri príležitosti z tého výročia narodenia Alexandra Dubčeka, slovenského lídra Pražskej jary, dňa 8. decembra 2021 usporiadalo Veľvyslanectvo Slovenskej republiky v Kanade v spolupráci s Ottawskou univerzitou webinár, ktorého zostrih vám teraz ukážeme.
Good afternoon to our Canadian and North American attendees. Good evening to the ones that join us also from Slovakia. My name is Vít Koziak. I'm ambassador of Slovakia to Canada, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you at the webinar Alexander Dubček, Slovak leader of the Prague Spring. The webinar is happening to commemorate 100th anniversary of the birth of Alexander Dubček, both Slovak and Czechoslovak politician and statesman. Without further ado, let me introduce our speaker, a brilliant Slovak historian, Dr. Peter Jašek from the Slovak Nation's Memory Institute. Dr. Jašek, it is a real pleasure to have you with us.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for the introducing. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for the invitation to this event, because for me it is a great pleasure and great honor to have a possibility and opportunity to make a speech regarding the life of Mr. Alexander Dubček. As was already said, he's one of the best Slovaks, definitely probably the best known Slovak politician in the world, and really during the last days we commemorated the 100th anniversary of his birth. And those who knew him personally and the people who I may speak with told me that he was really, in the true sense, undisputedly very human person. And hence his popularity, especially in 1968, when thanks to him many people believed that the socialism really could have a human face. And Dubček's name became a symbol of the hope and the symbol for the better life for the whole generation of the people who grew up during the 60s, and also those people in the Slovakia and around the world will always remember him as a symbol of the socialism of a human face. Alexander Dubček was born at the exactly same place as another huge figure in the Slovak history, which is Ľudovít Štúr. To help with my presentation, this is the building, as I said already, the parish house where Alexander Dubček and also Ľudovít Štúr have been born. After the Second World War, the life of the Alexander Dubček completely changed. The first year after the war, he established his family. He has the marriage with Anna, as I said already. He helped him during the war. Also, the first sons of Alexander Dubček was born, and in the 1948, during the communist coup d'état and establishing of the communist regime, we know nothing about the activities of the Alexander Dubček, because at those time he was a worker in the Trenčín in the one small company. But we can imagine that his professional CV was, from the point of view of the Communist Party, very interesting, because he grew up in the Soviet Union, he joined the anti-fascist resistance, fought in the Slovak National Uprising. So from the point of view of the Communist Party, he was really convinced communist. Even his father, who was well known, as I said already, among the really top Slovak communist functionaries and officials. In 1949, he became the first secretary of district committee of Communist Party in Trenčín. And in this period, Alexander Dubček, as I said, served as a highly ranking communist official. I will use even this picture. It is not very known because at this picture, Alexander Dubček is a young communist official from the district of the Trenčín. was that in 1955 he go to the Moscow to study at the high political university in the Moscow. Later on, when he came back to the Slovakia, once again his professional CV was even better because was added this experience as an alumni, we can say, of the Soviet schools. He became the first secretary of the regional committee of the Communist Party of Slovakia in Bratislava, which was really a high-ranking official. And later on in the 1960s, he became the secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia for industry and was responsible for the industry as a young official. Nevertheless, on this position, he definitely found out how the communist regime works in reality. And it is no coincidence that it was the time of the economic crisis of the communist regime. These years, 60 up to 62, it was the huge economic crisis in the Czechoslovakia. And from my point of view, this was another very important point in the thinking of Alexander Dubček in his political profile, because he found out that it is necessary to make some reforms, especially the reforms which are connected with the economy for the better living conditions and so on and so on. And especially, which is very important for this period of his life, that he also find out that the Slovak position in the Czechoslovakia is not very good, and that it is especially the Slovak economy which suffered by the centralization of the communist state. And also, one again, it was the food for his reform thoughts, which later on he worked in the praxis. The other very important milestone in the life of Alexander Dubček was April of the 1963, when he became the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Slovakia. The reform thinking of Alexander Dubček was based on the experiences from the study at the Moscow, and also from the experiences which he made as a secretary of the Central Committee for the Industry, because he see how in reality the communist regime worked. In April 63, he became the first secretary of the Communist Party in Slovakia, and the process which is called the Bratislava Early Spring, 1963 up to 68, started. And in reality, this process means the democratization of the communist regime in the Slovakia. Under the term of the democratization, we still need to keep in mind that even in the 1968, the Dubček reform attempts was the democratization, not to renown the democracy, but just the democratization of the communist regime. But it was really very profound and very deep, and these reform people could see even in the common life that the situation is changing, even in the politics. When we are speaking about the Bratislava Early Spring during the 1963 up to 68, this term is very connected to the Prague Spring. You know, the Slovak historians from the Historical Institute of the Slovak Academy of Sciences use this term Early Spring as somehow the commemoration that there was the Prague Spring, and before the Prague Spring was Bratislava Early Spring, where many reforms, thanks to Alexander Dubček, started. Under the democratization in the Slovakia, what we could understand, the process of the rehabilitations of the victims of the communist regime. As I said already, in the 50s, it was really the bloody times, and many people were sentenced, and also some communist officials like Gustav Husák, which were called so-called Slovak bourgeois nationalists. So the rehabilitations means that these political communist officials were rehabilitated and came back to the politics, especially the Gustav Husák. And what is very important for this reform movement in the Slovakia was really the culture boom. I used to say that during the 60s, the Slovak culture was at its best times, the golden times in many ways. We can say within the Slovak culture, the 20th century, I mean the writers, journalists, and so on and so on. And we really need to say that that was the journal which was called the Cultural Life. And really, this brings many new articles, open the forbidden topics, move the censorships, and so on and so on. So it was really the cultural booms at the 60s in the Slovakia, and this cultural boom and the political change is closely connected with the personality and the policy of Alexander Dubček. From the political point of view, it was very important that this policy was met with the skepticism in Prague, especially in the Antony Novotny, Alexander Dubček find a political enemy, and really it was the huge political struggle between Antony Novotny as the first secretary of the Communist Party in Czechoslovakia and Alexander Dubček as the first secretary of the Communist Party in Slovakia. And one of the main reasons why was this political struggle between them was Dubček's endeavor to increase the competencies of the Slovak bodies within the Czechoslovakia, because after 1960, the competencies of the Slovak bodies were simply were delayed or simply disappeared. It was really centralization of the state. But as Dubček found out, even the economic situation was very, very difficult due to the centralization of the state. This is the picture of Alexander Dubček as the first secretary of the Communist Party for the so-called Slovak bourgeois nationalism. And the picture below, Alexander Dubček is shaking hands with Vasil Biľak. Later on in 1968, Vasil Biľak became a pro-Soviet collaborator, but what could be a surprise during the 60s, during the Bratislava early spring, Vasil Biľak was the closest. Alexander Dubček has during the 60s a political struggle with Antony Novotny as a president, and this struggle ended in January of the 1968 when Alexander Dubček prevailed and became, instead of Antony Novotny, first secretary of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, which we may say was the most influential man within the Communist Party apparatus and the state apparatus. He came, for example, to the swimming pool and met with the people, talked with them, and so on, because the highest officials of the Communist Party were very unpopular among the people, and people were afraid of the politicians of the Communist Party, of course, because they know the 50s. But right now, Alexander Dubček was a completely different person, always smiling, always in the good mood, ready to speak with the people, and this was something completely new. And this is very important to mention, because this is one of the reasons why people really believe that socialism could have a human face. It was the Dubček's personality, because it was he helped to huge authenticity of the regime, because it was like him. It was not fake. It was the real Alexander Dubček. First of August of 1968 by the occupation of the Warsaw Pact armies. Later on, the discussions in Moscow followed, and for Alexander Dubček, it was a political disaster. It was clear and visible that there will be no place for the reforms or to continue to reforms and make them deeper. From the Moscow, as the normalization took place within the Czechoslovakia, his popularity very, very rapidly and very quickly fall down. The peak of this process was the April 1969, when he was withdrawn from the first secretary, became Speaker of the Federal Assembly, but in August 1968, on the first anniversary of the communist or on the Warsaw Pact troops invasion, in the streets there were the riots, and unfortunately Alexander Dubček signed the so-called Trancho law, and finally later on he withdrew from the position of the Speaker of the Federal Assembly. During the 1970s, he served for a few months as an ambassador in Turkey. But it was very clear that his political fall is very close. In the same year, he was excluded or expelled from the Communist Party. And later on, he became, once again, start to work as a worker during the 70s. And later on, during the late 80s, he became, once again, very active within the policy. And the huge change was the year 1988, when he go to Italy and was awarded as a Doctor Honoris Causa, the oldest university in the world. In the Bologna, it was him and Nelson Mandela. As I already said, during the 90s, he served as a Speaker of the Federal Assembly. Nevertheless, when the Czechoslovakia was in the process of breaking, there were some initiatives that Alexander Dubček could become the first president of the independent Slovak Republic, but these plans were abrupted in the 1992. On the 1st September, he has a car crash, and later on in the November of the 1992, he passed away as a result of this car crash. That he's a very popular, and what speaks volumes about him and his place in the nation's memory is that the place where the National Council of the Slovak Republic has its headquarters is called the Square of Alexander Dubček. So I guess that this is the huge award for Alexander Dubček, and speaks that he is very highly ranking among the Slovak society and within the memory of the nations.
Thank you to all who joined us together, especially to those who stayed until the very end. And I'm looking forward to having you at another event, either in person or virtually. So thank you very much. Goodbye and dovidenia.
K zime neodmysliteľne patrí sneh a ľad. Tereska Koziaková vám v ďalšom diele Misie 14 povie, čo sa deje so svetovými ľadovcami.
Prajem vám ten najkrajší eco-friendly deň. Volám sa Tereska Koziaková a vítam vás pri sledovaní mojej relácie Misie 14. Vážení diváci, do nového roku vám prajem všetko len to najkrajšie a najlepšie, veľa šťastia, porozumenia, pokoja, spokojnosti, peňazí, lásky a hlavne zdravia v týchto ťažkých časoch a ekologického myslenia. Naše prvé zimné mesiace, najmä stríčie dni, začali s veľmi vlhkým, mokrým počasím s teplotami nad 0 stupňov. Sneh sa neľahko udržával a zima celkovo nebola taká, ako ju poznáme. Dôsledky klimatickej zmeny už nie sú vzdialená budúcnosť. Kríza je tu a je ju vidno priamo pred našimi očami. Napriek tomu nám však usilovná Perinbaba dopriala na štedrý deň sneh i typický mráz. Užíme si to teda, kým sa dá. Misia 14 svojím názvom upozorňuje, že priemerná globálna teplota, na ktorú sme my, teda prírodné ekosystémy a naša civilizácia dobre adaptovaní, je 14 stupňov Celzia. Túto ideálnu teplotu sme však už prekročili a ak bude globálne oteplovanie pokračovať súčasným tempom, život na planéte bude mať vážne problémy. Preto treba bojovať o každú 10 stupňa Celzia. V misii 14 vám chcem ukázať, že je jednoduché spraviť každý mesiac 14 krokov, ktoré pomáhajú našej planéte. Zima a nízke teploty sú typická charakteristika Kanady. Ďalšou charakteristikou Kanady je, že sa tejto zime snažíme vyhnúť čo najviac ako môžeme. Kanadiania často trávia toto chladné obdobie v teplejších dovolenkových krajinách. Aj keď si to neuvedomujeme, celá naša planéta závisí od toho ľadu, od ktorého utekáme. Ľadovce sú obrovské masy ľadu, pomaly pohybujúce sa po pevnine. Pôsobia ako ochranný kryt nad zemou a oceánmi. Sú nesmierne dôležité, najmä preto, že ich jasne biela farba odráža teplo späť do vesmíru a udržuje našu planétu chladnejšiu. Na našej Zemi sa vyskytujú tisícky rokov, ale ľudská činnosť a emisie zapríčinili, že z nich rok čo rok ubúda rýchlo a viac ako normálne. Aj keď v nasledujúcich 10 ročiach výrazne obmedzíme emisie, viac ako tretina zostávajúcich ľadovcov na svete sa roztopí do roku 2100. Pokiaľ ide o morský ľad, 95% najstaršieho a najhrubšieho ľadu v Arktíde je už preč. Vedci predpokladajú, že ak to takto pôjde ďalej a emisie budú stále nekontrolovateľne stúpať, Arktída by mohla byť bez ľadu už v lete v roku 2040. Narastú hladiny oceánov, zvýši sa množstvo emisí v atmosfére, zmenia sa vzorce počasia a nastane postupná migrácia ľudí i zvierat zo zaplavených pobrežných oblastí do vnútrozemia. Aj keď je to veľmi zložitý problém, jediná nesprávna vec, ktorú môžeme spraviť, je odsúvať ho. Pozrime sa na to, čo môžeme spraviť z väčšej perspektívy. Krok 1. Šetrím energiu. Miesto toho, aby ste zvyšovali kúrenie na viac nepotrebných stupňov, skúste sa najprv zahriať so svetrom. Táto extra vrstva oblečenia nielen pomôže ušetriť energiu, ale aj ušetrí peniaze, špeciálne ak to budete robiť pravidelne. Krok 2. Násobenie. Podľa výskumu jedného londýnskeho žurnálu dáta z NASA satelitov ukázali, že ľadovcov ubudlo približne 5703 gigatonov medzi rokmi 2000 a 2019. Keď toto číslo premeníme na americké pounds, predstavuje to hmotnosť okolo 553 miliónov 475 346 Eiffelových veží. Krok 3. Produkt mesiaca a krok 4. Používa menej chémie. Veľa z nás síce zimu zdobí svoje kríky, dekorácie alebo nábytok v dome svetielkami. Ak ich plánujete kupovať ešte tento rok, vyberte si LED svetielka. Ich výkonnosť je oveľa lepšia, vydržia dlhšie a na rozdiel od tradičných svetielok, LED svetielka na skládkach nevypúšťajú škodlivé toxické látky. Krok 5. Používa menej plastov a krok 6. Nakupujem s rozumom. Ak si v obchode kúpite toľko vecí, koľko udržíte v rukách, neváhajte a povedzte predavačovi, že si ich odnesete. Na jednu alebo dve malé veci predsa nepotrebujete sáčok alebo plastovú igelitku. Prekonávam vlastnú lenivosť a vnímam prírodu. Aj keď býva vonku zima alebo sa vám iba nechce, je dôležité výjsť z domu aspoň raz za deň. V rámci toho skúste nakrmiť vtáčikov na vašej ulici. Krmivo môže byť hocičo od slnečnicových semiačok po oriešky. My sme doma dali dekoračné tekvičky odložené z jesene. Krok 9. Rozhodujem sa ekologicky. Problém, ktorý si všímam po celom meste, sú posolené chodníky. Aj keď efektívne pomáha roztápať ľad na cestách, sol nie je ani zďaleka ekologická. Pochádza z chloridu sódneho, ktorý je nebezpečný voči zvieratám, kontaminuje okolitú pôdu a znečisťuje rastliny. Je ťažké zmeniť, čo sa sype po veľkých cestách, ale na malých chodničkoch alebo pred domom by to fungovalo. My nesolíme vôbec, ale štrk, piesok alebo piliny znejú ako dobré alternatívy. Krok 10. Vyhľadávam informácie o ekológii a krok 11. Delím sa. Aj napriek všetkému, čo sme sa dozvedeli o topení ľadovcov, stále je mi ťažké predstaviť si to a myslím si, že nie som sama. Pozrime sa, čo sa stane s Kanadou. Do 15 rokov Nova Scotia by sa mohla stať ostrovom. Ak sa neopraví 200-ročná hrádza, rastúca hladina na Bay of Fundy oddelí provinciu od ostatných. Okrem toho tu bude viac záplav, viac búriek, budeme strácať živočíchov a vegetáciu zvyknutú na studené počasie a náš rybársky priemysel sa drasticky zmení, lebo ryby budú hľadať lepšie podmienky a chladnejšiu vodu. Recyklujem. Nič neoznámi koniec sviatkov ako vyschnutý vianočný stromček. Správne ho zrecyklujete, ak ho necháte pred svojim domom alebo bytovkou. Mesto by ho malo odniesť vašim normálnym kompostom. Nezabudnite z neho však ostrániť všetky dekorácie a akýkoľvek plast. Krok 13. Neplýtvám jedlom. Náš slovenský štedrovečerný stôl je vždy tradične plný koláčikov, maku a ovocia. Ak vám takéto maškrty ostanú po sviatkoch, treba ich dobre skladovať. Koláče dajte do zatvárajúcich krabičiek, aby sa nerozpadli, a ovocie do nejakej chladnej izby vo vašom dome. Krok 14. Dobré správy zo sveta ekológie. Dobrá správa o topení ľadovcov sa mi hľadala veľmi ťažko. Dozvedela som sa však o zaujímavých vedeckých vynálezoch, ktoré by mohli pomôcť našim ľadovcom. Vedci navrhli výstavbu obrovských prírodných múrov, ktoré by zabránili teplej oceánskej vode rozlamovať a topiť okraje ľadovcov svojimi vlnami. Boli by postavené z oceánskeho sedimentu s pomocou naprogramovaných robotov. Klimatická zmena nás naisto dobehla. Nebuďme však zúfali, ale určite robme, čo vieme. Ďakujem za pozornosť a teším sa na stretnutie pri ďalšom dieli mojej misie 14.
Po sviatkoch zimy tu takmer máme Sviatok zaľúbených. Andrea Matušková má pre vás náhľad do histórie tohto sviatku a pár tipov na darček pre vašu polovičku.
O 2 týždne 14. februára tu máme Sviatok svätého Valentína. Tento deň je sviatkom všetkých zamilovaných, kedy si lásku vyznávame viac ako inokedy. Obdarúvame sa kvetmi, sladkosťami či inými drobnosťami a stretávame sa na romantických miestach. Tento sviatok má už dlhodobú tradíciu, tiahnúcu sa niekoľko storočí. O svetom Valentínovi, ktorý žil v 3. storočí nášho letopočtu, koluje veľa legend. Jednou z najznámejších je kresťanská legenda, ktorá hovorí o svetom Valentínovi, ktorý bol mučeníkom, žijúcim za vlády cisára Klaudia II. Tento panovník rád a často viedol vojny, ale rímski muži jeho nadšenie nezdielali a neradi vstupovali do vojska. Podľa Klaudia bol ich dôvod jednoduchý. Nechceli opúšťať svoje ženy a rodinu. Ženatých mužov nepovažoval za dobrých bojovníkov, preto zakázal všetky zásnuby a sobáše v celom Ríme. Valentín bol rímsky kňaz, ktorý aj napriek cisárovmu zákazu tajne sobášil zamilované páry. Keď to cisár Claudius zistil, uväznil Valentína a odsúdil ho na trest smrti. Poprava sa konala 14. februára roku 296. Pred svojou smrťou napísal Valentín milostný list dcére väzenského dozorcu, do ktorej sa zalúbil. A tak vzniklo prvé valentínske prianie. V roku 469 pápež Gelasius ustanovil deň smrti svätého Valentína za pamätný deň na jeho počesť. Svätý Valentín sa tak stal patrónom zalúbených. Najstaršia zachovaná Valentínka je báseň z roku 1415, ktorú napísal orleánsky vojvoda Charles svojej manželke počas pobytu v zajatí v Anglicku. Jeho Valentínku si môžu turisti prečítať v britskej knižnici v Londýne, kde je súčasťou zbierky manuskriptov. Tento rok sme pre vás pripravili pár nápadov, ako prekvapiť svoju polovičku a stráviť spoločne príjemný sviatok zalúbených. Čo je lepšie než valentínsky deň v prírode? Vyberte sa spolu na dlhú prechádzku alebo objavte nový turistický chodník v lese, popri rieke alebo v parku, kde ste ešte neboli. Zahrajte sa na turistu vo svojom meste. Sú nejaké miesta, ktoré ste už dávno chceli vidieť, ale nikdy ste nemali čas alebo príležitosť? Alebo navštívte miesta, kde ste prežili pekné chvíle a pospomínajte na spoločné zážitky. Ak sme už pri kurzoch, fantázii sa medze nekladú. Prekvapte svojho partnera či partnerku spoločným online kurzom tanca, jogy, malovania či kúzlenia. Mnoho kurzov a nápadov nájdete na internete. Ak ste viac romanticky založení, vaša polovička určite ocení krásny album pripravený z fotiek a s útržkou zo spoločných zážitkov. Ak radi píšete, napíšte si navzájom ľúbostný list a opíšte, čo na tom druhom máte radi a prečo ho milujete. Dúfam, že sme vás trochu inšpirovali. Užite si krásny zamilovaný deň a prajme vám pekného Valentína.
Ani sme sa nenazdali a už je aj naše januárové vysielanie na konci. Budúci diel bude odvysielaný v nedeľu dňa 27. februára o 11:30 a v reprízach v útorok 1. marca o 17:30 a v sobotu 5. marca o 11:30. Tento program je sponzorovaný Úradom pre Slovákov žijúcich v zahraničí a Kanadskou slovenskou ligou. Ďakujeme vám za priazeň a tešíme sa na vás o mesiac. Krásneho Valentína a dovidenia na budúce.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
This is Rogers TV. Call the Rogers TV viewer response line. Email us or connect with us on social media.
It's closing time, and you stayed out longer than you planned. So now you can't drive, and the buses have stopped running.